It goes down to the wire at Lime Rock Park as the leader runs out of gas in the final corner. We have more LMDH news as more manufacturers hit the track for testing. And of course, we review everything you need to know coming out of the FCP Euro Northeast Grand Prix at Lime Rock Park. Buckle up, because you're about to go off in the S's. All right, let's get things kicked off today with some LMDH news. And this time it is once again Acura that we're going to talk about here. The Acura ARX06 has completed its initial rollout in France this weekend. Ricky Taylor, as well as two-time IMSA champion and HPD engineer Matt McMurray, shook down the car in Paul Ricard on Friday ahead of the first on-track proper test on Saturday and Sunday at Magny-Cours. It did also include the first night running for the car, as from here the car is now going to move over to the United States to begin its testing regimen over here in North America later this month. Now, while this test was going on, there was another test going on this side of the Atlantic, and that was at lovely Sebring, and there was Cadillac and Porsche present at that. Renger van de Zandert, of course, driving that Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac. He had very, very high praise for the yet-to-be-named Cadillac LMDH car after it successfully completed their first really extended on-track test at Sebring. Of course, Renger van de Zandert was joined over the course of these testing days by Earl Bamber, Alex Lynn, and Sebastian Bourdais. Renger said that I'm very positive and surprised about the whole running and the amount of laps that we were doing. We just kept running. That's really positive news coming out of the Cadillac camp, especially with, how everything's kind of been rushed through this process. Supply issues have affected all of these manufacturers, and to hear them come out and have no real reliability issues, it sounds like, off the get-go is good for them. Also, that's a very good quote for the Bosch the Bosch replacement unit that was being trialed on these cars after Porsche had some issues with that in some earlier tests over in Europe. So good news to come from there. And of course, Porsche was also at this test. There hasn't really been much that has come out of the Porsche camp so far, but there was a very interesting story that I saw this past week about that final Porsche LMDH car and just who might be manning that in IMSA in 2023. So the last true remaining mystery really here in the GTP category in IMSA is who's going to drive and who's going to be the team that operates that one remaining Porsche entry and that last Porsche customer car. Well, Marshall Pruitt released an article last week in Racer outlining the possibilities and who he thinks is going to be the team to operate that car. I'll link that article in the description below. But basically, the rumors for this started up at the 6 Hours of the Glen, that an IndyCar team, we've mentioned it here on Off in the S's before, that there's an IndyCar team that's interested in running that. This isn't, of course, the first IndyCar team that would be running in IMSA, or let alone at the highest level of IMSA competition. And of course, going through some of these IndyCar teams, not too many of them. We of course have Meyershank Racing. They're already partnered with Acura in that LMDH program. Penske gonna be they're partnered with Porsche. They're running the Porsche factory cars in IMSA. Chip Ganassi heading up the Cadillac effort. Andretti Autosport was interested in discussions with Audi. But when Audi bowed out, the connection has, of course, come together with Andretti and Alpine for Formula One. So the partnership is there already. Alpine's making an LMDH car. The question is, how is it going to be? How can they enter that in IMSA? Well, they'll cross that bridge when they get there, I'm sure. But that would seem to be a logical fit there. And then, of course, Mclaren, one of the other large teams, they've voiced on numerous occasions, as recently as last week, that it intends to compete with its own entry, potentially in 2024, 2025, with Zach Brown saying it's more a question of when than if. So they really don't seem like a possibility. But Pruitt did narrow it down to AJ Foyt Racing as the possibility for that final car. J.R. Hildebrand, who of course is a driver for AJ Foyt Racing in IndyCar, races occasionally with them. He's said to be very heavily involved in trying to secure some additional funding and sponsorship, and of course he would be very interested in driving that car as well. So there is a bit of momentum behind this. We'll just have to keep our eyes and ears peeled here to see what news might emerge on this front in the coming weeks, as I'm sure Porsche doesn't want to wait too much longer before that is announced to the world. Of course, if there is any more news that's announced about it, you will hear about it here on Off in the S's. A little bit of GTD news coming out of this past weekend, and in GTD Pro, Jack was back. Jack Hawksworth returned to the number 14 GTD Pro Vassar Sullivan entry after that accident that prevented him from racing at Watkins Glen and CTMP. He revealed that he sustained a burst fracture of his T12 vertebrae and a fracture in his right ankle, both of which required surgeries. So not good there for Jack, but it was great to see him back on track. And that Lexus looked pretty quick over the course of the weekend. We'll go over the race in just a moment. In some Lime Rock track-related news, there are further upgrades planned to Lime Rock Park that are in the process of being finalized, which includes the construction of an on-site hotel that would be accessible via public roads. It's unclear when that hotel would be scheduled to open, but it does look like the community and Lime Rock Park looking to invest a little bit more money in the track to improve that fan experience. And a brief piece of MX5 news that I thought it's worth touching on here. Copeland Motorsports, of course one of the large teams in the Mazda Idemitsu MX5 Cup Series, they are expanding their operation to include a Spec Miata program. And through this Spec Miata program, there will be a $60,000 scholarship for those who wish to take the next step up with the team. In order to get the $60,000 scholarship, or to win it, drivers will be competing with Copeland in a 7-race Spec Miata series, where drivers will from there be personally invited by the team to a 2-day event to be evaluated by a panel of judges. The overall winner will receive a $60,000 scholarship towards a full season in the Mazda Idemitsu MX5 Cup Series with Copeland Motorsports in 2024. The full press release for that can also be found down in the show notes. And there was some huge news coming out of the IMSA camp this week with regards to its schedule for 2023. Now we're going to dig deeper into this on next week's show, but I'll just touch on it quickly for now. Indianapolis Motor Speedway is poised to replace Mid-Ohio on next year's calendar, and this is according to numerous paddock sources. The race, which is likely to occur in the second half of the year, is understood to just assume that 2-hour and 40-minute format that Mid-Ohio currently has, before potentially expanding into a 5th Michelin Endurance Cup race in 2024. So of course there's been no formal announcement made of this by IMSA. They're going to be waiting for anything like this to be announced at the IMSA's State of the Sport address, which comes up in August when they head to Road America, so just a few weeks away. And we'll see, of course, confirmation of the 2023 calendar there as well. Also, some news that just came out today as I'm recording this. NASCAR is, of course, heading to the Chicago street circuit, but the IMSA is going to be heading there too, with IMSA saying that there will be an IMSA sanctioned racing series there that weekend. So we have no idea what that's going to be yet, but again, we are going to touch on both of these schedule notes in a dedicated episode next week. You are not going to want to miss it. If you're enjoying this video, let me know about it by crashing that thumb into that like button. Jumping into the events of this past weekend, we're going to start off with the Michelin Pilot Challenge. In qualifying, it was John Dubé in the Grand Sport class, getting the pole with a time of 53.691 in his Porsche number 28 that he shares with teammate Stephen McAleer. Alfredo Najari in the Riley Motorsports Toyota was just 200ths behind in second, with the number 56 Murillo Racing Mercedes of Kenton Koch rounding out the top three. In TCR, it was Robert Wickens who sat on pole. What a tear that man has been on lately. He was also the fifth fastest driver in the session. Yes, fifth fastest, factoring in TCRs and Grand Sport cars. The TCR cars were very much intermingled with the GS cars here this weekend. And of course, he secured that pole in his number 33 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai that he shares with teammate Mark Wilkins. This was his first pole in IMSA. Harry Gottsacker brought his TCR entry across the line for second position, and Michael Johnson was third, as both drivers were just under 3/10 behind Wickens. And it was also a Brian Herta Autosport top four sweep, with Mason Filippi rounding out the top four. Jumping into the race though, and the 2-hour race that took place on Saturday afternoon really started off calm, but man oh man did it escalate as the race went on. A relatively quiet opening half hour before the elbows started coming out, when former Olympic snowboarder AJ Muss, driving that number 2 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai, got into the number 17 JDC Miller Motorsports Audi in turn 1 and sends them around for a spin. AJ would serve a drive-through penalty shortly after for incident responsibility. Moments later, the number 59 Core Motorsports Mustang, driven by Bob Mclaren, goes for a pass up the inside of the number 40 PF Racing Mustang of James Pisek, who was then sent in to the turn 9 barriers. This came after that number 40. It looked like he just didn't get good traction off of turn 8. It may have been because he dipped those left-hand side Michelin tires just off into the grass slightly, but just lost that momentum enough for the number 59 entry to try and send it up the inside. Unfortunately, when the 59 made it to the inside, almost completed the pass, but just tried to return to the racing line just a little bit too early, really punted the number 40 right off the track and into the wall, and that ended the day for them. It set up really an awkward scenario for these teams as the first full course yellow was thrown, as they were just under minimum drive time. By the time that the GS pit stops had cycled through, the TCRs were able to box, and 40 minutes of race time had surpassed at this point, so they were within the minimum drive time was 40 minutes for this race, so they were then able to make their driver changes. But meanwhile, some of the GS cars actually came back down pit road when the pits opened for all categories at the same time after the TCRs were done, and they completed their driver change swap at that point. So mixed strategies kind of going on, just an awkward situation for some of, especially those GS teams. This is when things started to get a little bit hairy, because action would get underway for another 20 or so minutes until the hour and 5-minute mark, and the full course yellow was thrown yet again. This time it was for the number 56 Murillo Racing Mercedes, driven at the time by Eric Foss, who rear-ended the number 46 Team TGM Porsche of Matt Plum on the exit of turn 8. The Porsche sustained big damage after making that contact, slammed into the inside wall and spun back out across the track, somehow missing other competitors. This exit of turn 8 down the hill into turn 9, very difficult. Downhill, the drivers, they don't have great visibility, but they also kind of lose some of the grip on the car until they really get to the bottom of the hill and kind of bottom out. So I'm amazed that nobody else got caught up in this. It was quite something to see that car sliding across the track. Thankfully, everybody would be okay in this, of course. And then this led to one of the more interesting, kind of curious events of the race. Under the safety car, the number 60 Mustang finds themselves in the pits with very large damage to the right front after contact with the number 22 Hardpoint Porsche under full course yellow. It's believed that the cars were weaving back and forth, trying to get some heat into the tires, and came together at this point. Not really 100% sure, but at the end of the day, it ultimately led to the retirement of both of those entries. And with this extended time under full course yellow, fuel strategy really came into play as Kyle Marcelli stayed out to lead the field back to green with about half an hour remaining. So he is one of, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was the only GS car that rolled the dice to try and make it to the end here. So it really came down to a fuel mileage gain for him. At the end of the race, his team would say that they were more than fine on fuel and it wasn't really a concern, especially after the second incident under that full course yellow conditions extended that period. But it certainly led to a storyline here for the back half, for the remaining stint in this race. And those final 20 minutes were stellar here. So Kyle Marcelli, he got out to a nice 5-second lead, navigating through some early traffic very, very nicely. And as I said, he built up a 5-second lead on the number 71 Rebel Rock Camaro of Robin Liddell, who's been very quick over the last few races. So Kyle Marcelli, of course, in that number 877 JG Wentworth Racing Mustang, got a great jump on that, on the restart, of course, navigating that traffic. And meanwhile, while this was going on, the TCR battle was very hot as well. These guys running pretty much nose to tail for the entire race, but really in this last stint, with those TCR leaders, really the traffic coming into play for them as well, with the slower GS traffic, and in particular with the number 65 Murillo Racing Mercedes of Tim Probert. He ended up going for a spin after making slight contact with the second place car in TCR, that number 19. So those TCR cars were really good through the first sector of the track, with the GS cars really only making up that ground in the straight lines, but those slower GS cars really causing a problem for some of the, especially the TCR leaders in this race. Moments after this happened, we stayed green, but moments later is when Robin Liddell caught Kyle Marcelli, and this really began a great battle for the lead here in the closing laps of the race. It concluded with a pass through turn 1 and into turn 2 by Liddell to take the lead for good. This was a lap after, thinking he had the pass done, but Marcelli making a charge back for it in coming on the exit of turn 4. It was a great battle between these two, but it was very clear that Marcelli was the slower driver at this point. Perhaps the tires starting to give out on that Ford. So Marcelli, Robin Liddell, of course, he would take the lead for good and bring that Camaro home for the win in the GS division. Kyle Marcelli and co-driver Sheena Monk would lose the second place to the number 7 Aston Martin of Trent Hinman in the closing moments, but they would hold on for that final podium spot. Alan Bjornsson and Trent Hinman, with their second place finish, extend their championship points lead to 265 points with just 3 events remaining. They are getting ready to put a bow tie on that championship. Meanwhile, in TCR, it was the number 17 Unitronic JDC Miller Motorsports entry of Chris Miller and Mikey Taylor who claimed victory. Of course, you will recall they rebounded from that spin that, or no, it wasn't. I'd hardly call it a spin. I'd call it a friendly bump, an unfriendly bump in turn 1 at the half-hour mark. And then, of course, the intense battles that ensued there in the TCR division over the remainder of that race. They did a great job to come back through the field. They won by 1.1 seconds over the number 15 Bellegarde and Techniseal Racing Audi that was shared by Preston Brown and Denise DuPont, and the number 54 Hyundai of Steven Simpson and Michael Johnson claimed that final podium spot. In the WeatherTech Championship in practice, John Edwards led the way in that number 25 Team RLL BMW. Didn't I say that BMW was going to be quick this weekend? He set a lap time of 51.735 seconds to outpace the GTD class leading number 39 Carbon with Peregrine Racing Lamborghini of Robert McGuinness by just under 8/800ths of a second, Jack Hawksworth in his return was third, just 6/1000ths behind McGuinness. The session did run free of red flags, but Aiden Reed did have an off-track experience in turn 5 in his number 51 Rick Ware Racing Acura. Not the only time that Acura went off-track this weekend. He was able to make it back to the pits, but had to be taken behind the wall for some front-end repairs. In second practice, it was a late lap by Matt Campbell that put the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche to the top of the boards on a 51.050. He edged out Jordan Taylor by half a tenth in the number 3 Corvette, and GTD was paced by the number 32 Korthoff Motorsports Mercedes of Stephen McAleer, who recorded a best time of 51.733, which was 4th overall. And as it was with Free Practice 1, there were no major incidents or red flags to note in the session. As we move on to qualifying, Matt Campbell carried the speed through from second practice to sit on pole for the first time in his IMSA career. He set a 51.079 in his number 9 Porsche to take the GTD Pro pole by just 18/1000ths over Jack Hawksworth in his Lexus. BMW Team RLL rounded out the top 3 with Connor De Filippi's 51.227 lap time. The 5-car class overall was separated by just over 0.2 of a second. In GTD, it was Frankie Montecalvo in the number 12 Lexus that paced that field with a best lap time of a 51.459. He narrowly edged out Robert McGuinness in the number 39 Carbon with Peregrine Racing Lamborghini by 6/1000ths of a second. They were very quick all weekend long. And Roman DeAngelis qualified third for Heart of Racing. He was 18/1000ths off of class pole, so the top 3 separated by 18/1000ths. Incredibly close here across these categories. In fact, across the 2 classes, the top 13 were separated by just 6.5 tenths. It was great to see. Unfortunately, though, after failing post-race inspection, that number 25 Team RLL BMW was moved to the rear of the grid for the start of Saturday afternoon's race. So, you remember how I said BMW would have a great race on last week's show? Well, and I think this is going to be BMW's time to shine. It wasn't a great start to this race for them. for that number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW that was driven by Robbie Foley, as they had to retire very early on in this race due to an engine misfire issue. Also, the number 25 BMW Team RLL car, which showed great pace over the course of the weekend, they would also retire after numerous trips down pit road for what was believed to be a similar issue. They had a rough overall race, as earlier in the stint they had spun in the final corner trying to avoid the slowing Mercedes of Cooper McNeil, who was coming in for a pit stop. Speaking of bad starts, it was also not a great start for the number 39 Carbon with Peregrine Racing Lamborghini of Robert McGuinness, who deviated lanes on the start and had to serve a drive-through penalty. Later in the race, the number 3 Corvette driven by Antonio Garcia and the number 79 WeatherTech Mercedes, who we talked about them just a moment ago with that Team RLL BMW. Well, Jules Gounon, who is driving that car, came together with the number 3 Corvette that resulted in suspension damage for the Corvette, and they ultimately lost 5 laps in the pits, taking them out of podium contention. The first 2 hours of this race ran fairly straightforward, with the exception of, the drive-through penalty, the bit of coming together. It was a pretty clean race. Late in the race, though, things changed. The number 51 Rick Ware Racing Acura, driven by Ryan Eversley, is off in the turn 9 barriers with just about half an hour to go after a slight driver error. This was later found out to be, contributing issues into this were brake and tire issues that the team were struggling with over the course of this race. This brought out the race's only full course yellow with less than half an hour remaining. When the race restarted, it resulted in quite a bit of beating and banging here, with the number 16 Hardpoint Porsche going around for a spin and some bodywork damage that the number 12 GTD Vassar Sullivan Lexus would pick up, that required them to box and remove the hood in the final laps. That contact for the number 12 Lexus came after the number 57 Mercedes of Philip Ellis made contact with them on the restart. Don't worry, though, because that number 57, they had some unfortunate luck go their way later on. The real drama, though, came when this luck reared its head for the 57, as on the final lap, yes, in the final corner, the number 57 Mercedes runs out of gas, and they would drop down from leading to 5th in the final results. The number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW of Brian Sellers and Madison Snow inherited the lead and took the victory, so it wasn't all bad for BMW at the end of the day. Behind them, though, there was a scramble to the line between 3 cars that would see the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin. What a roll they have been on. They take 2nd place, and the number 39 Carbon with Peregrine Racing Lamborghini, well, they edged out the number 32 Korthoff Motorsports Mercedes for 3rd place at the line. Mathieu Gemini and Matt Campbell win for the 4th time this season in GTD Pro, and they extend their points lead. They charged through the field after fuel strategy and just pit strategy in general put them on the back foot early in this race. The number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin of Alex Riberas and Ross Gunn finished 2nd, 1.8 seconds back, and Jack Hawksworth and Ben Barnicoat completed the podium in the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. Just one post-race note for us to mention, and that's the WeatherTech Mercedes, who was running, of course, in GTD for the first time this season after making that switch. They were demoted to 7th place in class after Gounon was deemed responsible for an incident with the number 16 Wright Motorsports Porsche of Jan Halen. We mentioned that they went around. It was because of contact with the number 79. So Gounon and the number 79 entry was assessed the equivalent of a drive-through penalty post-race, so they lost 23 seconds off of their race finishing time. Heading into the championship points coming out of Lime Rock Park, and in GTD Pro, it is the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche with a 215-point lead on the Corvette Racing entry. The number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus finds himself in third, 260 points back. They are just 11 points ahead of the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin. And in GTD Not Pro, it is the number 32 Team Korthoff Motorsports Mercedes that still leads the way with 2,071 points. They are 40 points ahead of the number 16 Wright Motorsports Porsche and 61 points ahead of the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, who have been coming on very strong in recent races. Of course, just a few races remain for these classes this season, and while GTD Pro looks to be, it's starting to be a bit of a runaway for that Pfaff Motorsports Porsche, this GTD class is still very much up for grabs. No IMSA racing on this weekend, or actually next weekend as well, but there is a Formula One on this weekend. They head to Paul Ricard, where Acura just did a shakedown of their LMDH car. You can catch qualifying on Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, with the race going Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Indy has a doubleheader going on at Iowa this weekend. On Saturday, the HighVDeals.com 250 goes at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, with the Hy-Vee Salute to Farmers 300 going Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. There's also a full weekend of NASCAR racing going on with the in Pocono with the Truck Series and the CRC Brackleen 150 going Saturday at noon Eastern Time. Xfinity goes also on Saturday at 5 Eastern Time for the Explore the Pocono Mountains 225, and it all wraps up on Sunday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time with the M&M's Fan Appreciation 400, where I hope every single fan that's in attendance gets some M&M's. And then wrapping it all up for the weekend, the GT World Challenge America is at the Glen this weekend, along with GT America and TC America. Those GT World Challenge races can be seen on Saturday at 2:15 Eastern Time and on Sunday at 1:15 Eastern Time. Both of those can be watched on the GT World YouTube channel. I'll put the link to that in the show notes. Missed all of the LMDH news from last week? Or perhaps you didn't know that Kamui is assessing all of his IMSA options in LMP2 and in GTD. We have all the coverage from a wild week in IMSA last week right here. That will conclude our FCP Euro Northeast Grand Prix at Lime Rock Park review. That next week, though, we'll be back. Of course, as we mentioned, we're going to be digging into that recent news about the IMSA calendar for 2023. But until the next one, I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.